Hi, this is Davin Baptiste from the Hooks Institute, and I am here with two 2024 Benjamin L. Hooks National Book Award finalists, Dr. Charles McKinney and Francois Hamlin. Yes?
Francois,
Go ahead.
yes.
Francois, and they wrote a great book called From Rights to Lives. How are you guys doing today?
Very
Wonderful.
well, very
Okay,
well.
good. Let's jump right in. Let's talk about a little bit of the inspiration for this book. When you talk about From Rights to Lives, the evolution of the Black freedom struggle. What went into that, and what was the inspiration for that?
Well, first,
Well, you
go
go.
ahead, go ahead.
This is the problem.
I-
Um,
I'll throw questions to you. I'll say, Francois.
no, it's fine. Well, we're both civil rights historians, and so we've known each other on the circuit for many years. We've written extensively individually, and we were just having a conversation, I don't know, 2018, 2019, about teaching and some of our frustrations about what we see as an undereducation of our students around US history in general and Black history in particular, them coming in with sort of very set notions of what the movement was, and so when we're comparing notes about our frustrations about it and sort of how we are trying to get students to unlearn what they've been taught, to kind of complicate a very simplistic narrative that they are taught. So we really did come to this as a very methodological and intellectual teachable project, that we first considered to be like a primer for teachers, really. Chuck, do you want to say how we continue from there?
Sure. The other thing that we were thinking about at the time, yeah, and this is like 2018, right? The other thing that we were thinking about was, we're in the midst of the Black Lives Matter moment, right? And so the other thing that we were thinking about was, was this question, right? What would it look like to create a volume that put those two moments, the civil rights Black Power moment and the Black Lives Matter moment, in conversation with each other.
Hmm.
Another one of the things that we civil rights historians, Francois, me, and literally everyone else we know, right, who does civil rights stuff, was we were constantly thinking about all of the ways that the movement, right, the civil rights movement, the Black freedom struggle of the 50s and 60s was shaping the terrain of the contemporary moment. But there are lots of missed opportunities to talk about the ways in which the civil rights Black Power period was shaping, right, was shaping, activists thinking around Black Lives Matter, right,
Definitely.
was shaping the larger nations notions of Black Lives Matter. So there was a lot of stuff in the mix, but there was a lot of stuff missing, right? And so the other sort of motivation here, right, was what would it look like to create a volume that placed these two moments in conversation with each other, so that people on the ground now could have, hopefully, right, could derive a clearer understanding of the shape and nature and terrain of the movement that they were participating in.
That's awesome. Okay, let me go into what do you guys find compelling, and what compelling discoveries did you make while researching, and definitely while writing? Let's talk about researching first, Dr. McKinney. What compelling discoveries? Like, I know you're a bathed historian, but did you find anything like new? You know what I mean? Like sometimes when you start reaching, you just find little stories and little rabbit holes that, like, oh wow, I didn't even know that.
So let me move up a level in terms of one of the compelling discoveries, right? One of the compelling discoveries that Francoise and I made was magical things can happen when you work intentionally to put together an edited volume, right? There's not a lot of love for edited volumes out in these academic streets these days, and there's a whole bunch of different reasons for that, right? But one of the great things that happened was, when we decided to do this endeavor together, um, there was just so much synergy that Francoise and I had around the cultivation and creation of the project, right? There was never a crossword, right? I mean, we just had a great, I mean, we had a great time. And so one of the compelling discoveries was, right, if you create a volume with intention, if you create a volume thinking about sort of communal benefit. If you bring the ethos of the movement into this work, then magical things can happen, right? And so, from there, then we were able to create this space where all of our authors and us, right, in the last chapter of our book, were really sort of driven to think broadly and deeply about our subjects, to think broadly and deeply about our topics, right? And so that was one of the great discoveries for me, right? Was just this really powerful reminder that when you bring an ethos of a beloved community into a project like this, you can really create something magical.
Okay, Francois.
So the process of this knowledge production, right, becomes really important to the outcome. And I think this magic that we found by accident, perhaps, kind of this very carefully curated, edited volume, has paid off, right? Taking the time to do. I mean, of course, doing it during a global pandemic did slow us down, but I think that made it better, because then 2020 happened.
Right.
And so we were able to really sit with, what did it look like? What did this project look like in 2018, and how does it look now in 2020, 2021, right? And so this movement, and we think about movement building in general as a community endeavor. And so this process of writing this book became that. We had a workshop. We were able to have a workshop where we brought everyone together and literally workshopped the articles together, the essays together as a group, which of course then kind of raises the level of accountability for everyone.
Yeah.
It frames the project. Everyone brings their innovations and ideas to everyone's article, and this very comparative and sort of very generous, supportive spirit. And I think you see that in the outcome of very strong essays. There isn't a weak link in any of them. You know what I mean? Usually when you see these edited volumes, there's always a couple of essays you're like, how did that get in there? I don't think you can say that in ours. And I think the fact that we're a finalist is, and very rarely do edited volumes get awarded anything, speaks to the care that we put into it earlier. And so we're really proud of that.
All right, and like I said, we were reading through it, and I was thumbing through it about 2 weeks ago, and I was like, they're onto something. They're really onto something. But how do you think this book will resonate with college students or with the younger generation that are coming up, which have a lot of fire, but I find a lot of them in this time of a lot of half storytelling and misinformation. How is something like this that is well researched, that is deeply thoughtful, how will it resonate with students? I'm not saying it's a slow read, but how will something that was researched and kind of academic, how will that resonate? Because it's not like a buzzword type of thing that the now generation is used to. Well, and Francois, you can answer that. Oh. And then I'll throw it to you, Chuck.
I mean, think about it. I mean, our college students brought us to this project in the first place. So they were always in our mind, right? They really anchored our discussions about how to connect this very historical moment to this present moment that we're living in. So we were thinking about them from the start. So reinforcing why history matters, because I think that is the crux of what our frustrations were. And I think is a crux of many of the problems we're seeing now, right? Is that things are happening now because people don't understand the history. So that was the anchor for this book to start with. And so the upside of an edited volume is that you have a series of case studies, so people can dip into topics and issues and subjects that they're interested in, and still get the overall message of the book, because we're so intentional about making sure there's a through line, and that each article can be read on its own, but belongs in this collection as well. So if you're interested in art, there's an article about art. If you're interested in police brutality and activism, there's an article on that. If you're interested in religion, there's an article on that. But it all belongs in this whole too.
Charles?
So, I mean, the first thing that came to mind for me, right, is you talked about how students today, there's a lot of fire, right? In the rhetoric and in some instances in their actions and language and stuff. So this book shows you how other people arrived at the fire,
Mhm.
right? A scholar that I really admire talked a little. I heard him talking about how politics is built, right? It's a built process. Well, movements are built,
Yeah.
right? It's also an intentional process, right? And so we're showing. So if you are deeply invested in the fire right now, then check out From Rights to Lives so you can see how people in previous generations also arrived at that fire,
Mm.
right? And this is centrally about young people,
Mhm.
right? One of the things that, and that's one of the other things that we, I think serve as a really powerful reminder here, right? Is that, in a critical mass of these chapters, we're discussing the activities of college students, college age students, right? Late teens, early 20s. Y'all are driving the action,
Yeah.
right?
I think I think
In
that's
some
missed
really
a lot.
profound, yeah, in some really profound and dynamic and central ways. And so this book serves on some level, this book serves as a reminder of that, right? So our hope is that that college students, regardless of their sort of political acumen, regardless of where they are, whether they're activists or they're thinking about history or they're thinking about the contemporary moment, our hope is that young people can read this book or chapters of this book, right? Because there's so many entryways here. There's religion, there's sports, there's the diasporic, right? There's gender. There's all kinds of local histories, local studies, so on and so forth. There's so many entryways here, and so our hope is that young people will find one of these entryways and say, this is how we got here.
Yeah, I think that a lot of kids miss because the pictures are all mostly in black and white. They think that these heroes were so old when King did a lot of his lifting in his 30s. Fred Hampton died when he was 20, 21 when
Right.
Fred Hampton died. These kids, especially college kids, if you were around that time, they would be your peers, pretty much. And I think a lot of
Right.
some of that is missed, so they miss that. So I appreciate that topic. I mean that comment. So the whole book kind of marries the old and the new. So I mean, one of the questions was, how does your book tie to current social events? But I think your book is that. The whole thing is tied to that. So let's just let's unpack that a little bit of what are some specifics that you could say that this thing that we edited is definitely tied to something that can kind of be or may have been the forefather to this part of the movement, whereas like the civil rights struggle kind of being the forefather to the Black Lives Matter movement.
Chuck?
So, one of the things that Francoise and I have been talking about since, before, during, and after the publication of the book, right, is just simply that history matters, right? And we can't get around it as much as this nation tries to get around, to forget, to obscure, to blur, to unlearn the history. History
Yes.
matters, right? And so we can't understand if we don't understand these previous moments, right? If we don't understand the essential ingredients that comprise a civil rights or a Black Power period, if we don't understand the essential ingredients that comprise the Black Lives Matter moment, then we simply cannot fully understand, right, the contemporary moment, right?
Mm,
And the other thing that we always have to be mindful of, right, is that there is a heavy and large and deep investment in misinformation, right? There's a deep investment in ignorance. There's a investment in, right, in framing these points of what we're calling in the book liberatory possibility as, oh, well, this just y'all are just a bunch of young, ignorant, you're a bunch of young, ignorant 19-year-olds who are out here angry at something. You don't know how the world
yeah.
works.
Yeah.
And so, drink some decaf, go back to class, go to work, get a job, right? So on and so forth, right? And so again, what we're trying to do here is to say, in order to make sense of the contemporary moment, um, here's a book that can serve as an anchor for
Hmm.
you, right? In terms of providing the context that you need to make more sense of the moment that you live in.
Wow. Okay, Francois, I'm going to throw this other question at you. Um, I want to take it a little bit more personally. How did editing all these articles and kind of collabing with the group, how did that affect you, or what experience did that bring out to you personally? I know as a historian and as a researcher and as a writer, you did that, but you're also a breathing human and a woman and how did that personally affect learning about this and putting this project together? How did it personally affect you?
I mean, it happened. Most of it happened during the pandemic, so there was a sense of community that was built because of that, which was, always It was a wonderful experience just for that. There were groups of folks who we could have these conversations with, work on their essays with, um, and sort of watch the growth of this thing come together and gel and tighten. I mean, I had great joy co-writing with Charles. There's a couple of, beginning and end that we kind of anchor the book with our writing together. And again, sort of all the horror stories of co-writing is like, it's a horrible, horrible thing. I would do it again in a heartbeat. It was so easy, um and quick in many ways, that we were able to throw together something and we're like, oh my gosh, that's actually really good. and and that was a real joy. And I'm really grateful for that. And I think the whole process of it, the way we thought about it, um was joyful. The material isn't always very joyful, right? We're talking about
Yeah.
a lot of suffering in many ways, and a lot of, seeing deterioration of things, but the process of it was lovely. The authors are spurring each other on. We're spurring each other on. That the workshop was so reaffirming, of the importance of community building and building community to do the work, but also to do the work of movement building, but also to do the work of knowledge production in a way that will outlive us, hopefully, right? The process itself is almost as important as the product.
Hmm.
And hopefully that is something that a lot of folks can see in the writing and see in the book, and not take away and, become a new model for how to put together these edited volumes, so that it no longer has the reputation that many of them have.
The
And I think
oh,
we had an intentionality, right? So there are graduate students and full professors in this volume, and we wanted that, but you can't necessarily tell who is who from the actual result, and that's what we wanted. So again, that was, we were able to actually do it, and that was pretty fabulous.
one
Sorry.
thing one thing that really stuck out to me also was, to bring it back to the current moment, was some of the global struggles that are going on, like the stuff in the Congo, of course, stuff in Gaza, the stuff in Nepal, and all that stuff in France that was going on. Do you guys see any parallel from the struggle back in the day with like apartheid and civil rights and all that, and then the struggles that are going on with totalitarianism around the country, and then just like kids rising up and fighting these kind of like storied regimes globally?
So the first thing that comes to mind for me with that question, right, is the conclusion of the book is based in Memphis,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? As we were putting the finishing touches on this book, Tyree Nichols was murdered in our town, right? And so automatically we were like, oh well, we have to talk about this, right? We have to write about this. This has got to be this. This can be the way. This has to be the way, right? We end the book by coming back to Memphis, right? Because we started in Memphis a little bit in the introduction, right? So let's come back to Memphis and talk about this moment in Memphis, but also talk about the ways that organizers and activists are responding, in a way that shows that they clearly have been growing and thinking,
Hmm.
that the process of liberatory possibility has expanded and improved, across, over the years, right? And that process, right? We see that process also reflected in, Kashana Soldier's chapter, right, about Black Lives Matter in France,
Yeah.
right? And so then from there, it's a really small step to take a look at other places and spaces, where people are fighting for liberatory possibility and say, hey, you know what, that process, the more we understand this process, the more this process starts to look really familiar, right? In terms of people thinking, learning, and growing in real time, trying to figure out how to confront state power, how to confront oppression, how to confront genocide, right? How to confront these things. What does that mean politically, tactically? What does that mean in terms of relationships with the media? What does that mean in terms of building coalitions, both internally and internationally, right? So you see all of those elements being reflected throughout this book, right? So in this moment, when you see what's going on in the Middle East, when you see what's going on in, you know, in parts of Africa, when you see what's going on in Central America, you can have the language now, right, to begin to think about and contend with these really complicated and complex circumstances that are, you know, that are transpiring globally, right? You know, one of the things we say in the book, right, is the local is where the global is situated, right? And one of the things we tend to do is, you know, in our consistent efforts to sort of downplay the efforts of activists and other folks here, right? One of the byproducts of that is sort of disconnecting this work from the work that other folks are doing in other places, in other parts of the world, right? And so with any luck, what we've also done, right, is given people the connective tissue, the language with which to think through and think about these other struggles taking place around the world, and think about how those patterns and practices, right, are also being reflected in the United States, also being reflected in the cities implicated in this book, up to and including Memphis.
Right. And also there's a sense of connectivity. So if you are in any of these other countries, you're not on your own, because these are happening elsewhere globally, and you're part of a longer tradition of struggle globally, which does make you feel less alone, right? It does give you the tools, but also with technology, there are these connective, the connective tissues are even stronger with the technology, to kind of understand that how these movements are generational, sparked by young people, but it's also very, very global. And it was then, and it is now, and it will continue to be.
Yeah, and to your point, Dr. McKinney, that's why history matters. Just to frame up what you said. So I'm going to throw this last question, tie it up with this. I'm going to throw it to you, Francois. What does being a finalist of the 2024 Benjamin L. Hooks National Book Award mean to you?
You know, apart from the obvious, it is the honor of being considered for the award. You know, Hooks himself was a pioneer of civil rights, right? And so, and he really, his whole life kind of embodied what it means to show up in a variety of spaces. You know, he was on the streets, he was in courtrooms, classrooms, government, you know, doing policy, all of that stuff. And so I think it really does reflect what we're doing in the book, right? So activism and advocacy can happen in so many different forms and ways. So it does seem really fitting to be considered for this award, because of his specific charge as an activist, but also the kind of work we were trying to do with this book. You know, and the book getting attention is great, of course, but having the attention placed and are connected to Hooks and this mission, it just seems really perfect. The synergy seems to be really perfect. So apart from just of the honor of being considered a finalist for anything, this one in particular is very meaningful.
Okay. Dr. McKinney, would you like to add to that, or?
Sure. Francois took all the good words, so I'll come up with some more words. I mean, I think for me, the special resonance is because this book, you know, there's a significant portion of this book that is about Memphis, right? You know, and so this award, you know, being a finalist for the Hooks Award, right, which is based at the University of Memphis, named after this titan of the civil rights movement in Memphis, right? And you know, in our little book, you know, giving a nod to, you know, the decades of work that activists and others have put in to move Memphis forward, right? You know, to be recognized by by an institution and by a book award that bears the name of one of these titans of the Memphis movement, is a really special honor. And that's one that we do not take lightly and that we greatly appreciate.